Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday, 9 o'clock here on the East Coast. I'm Rob Nelson.
I'm Jay Struberg.
And I'm Alexa Liacco.
President-elect Trump continuing to shock the political establishment, if not his political supporters, choosing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the nation's chief health officer. A vaccine skeptic with other unorthodox views about medical science, Kennedy is the latest Trump appointee to signal the president-elect's intention to radically transform the federal government.
Final election results from 2 congressional districts solidify a slim majority for the Republicans in the House. 7 House races remain undecided, but the GOP now has 218 seats, the bare minimum to take command of the chamber.
And happening this hour, Attorney Ben Crump will hold a news conference to announce the filing of a lawsuit on behalf of Malcolm X's family. The suit alleges that various individuals and government agencies played a role in the conspiracy leading to Malcolm X's assassination in 1965 and engaged in a decades-long cover-up that deprived his family of justice.
Rudy Giuliani's attorneys are now asking a judge for permission to drop him as a client. The specific reason was redacted, but a court filing indicates the attorneys are asserting that Giuliani has been an unreasonably difficult client. Giuliani faces a deadline today to turn over property and financial records to those 2 election workers that he was convicted of defaming. All right, our top story this hour, President-elect Trump continuing to pretty much test the bounds of his influence over the GOP-led Senate with controversial appointments to his incoming administration.
The latest, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services. Kennedy, a member of one of the nation's most storied Democratic families, would oversee Medicaid and Medicare, as well as agencies such as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Food and Drug Administration.
But Kennedy's promotion of debunked anti-vaccine conspiracy theories, his calls for communities to stop putting fluoride in their drinking water, and his claims of corruption in the nation's public health establishment all could make his confirmation difficult, even with Republicans holding a majority in the Senate. National political correspondent Stephanie Liebergen live with us now from the White House with the latest information on Trump's cabinet picks. Good morning, Stephanie.
Hey, good morning. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that pick of RFK Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services, looking at, what he will be potentially in charge of if he were to be confirmed by the Senate. Now, as HHS Secretary, he would be overseeing 11 different agencies, including the FDA and the CDC. He'd be an advisor on health, welfare, and income security programs. So think about Medicare and Medicaid. He'd also be aiming to improve, the effectiveness of healthcare programs we have across the country. And while this might be a controversial pick, it's not exactly a surprise. It's something that President-elect Trump talked about on the campaign trail. They campaigned together. It's something that he alluded to before he made the pick official in his announcement yesterday. And last night, we heard from President-elect Trump for the first time since election night, and he said that RFK would be empowered to make changes to potentially long-standing food and drug policies.
We want you to come up with things and ideas and what you've been talking about for a long time, and I think you're going to do some unbelievable thing. Nobody's going to be able to do it like you, and boy, does he feel it in his heart. So congratulations also to your family.
2 other cabinet picks were announced yesterday. That includes the nominated to lead the VA, Doug Collins. He's a former member of the House of Representatives representing Georgia. He's an Air Force Reserve chaplain still to this day. He's been in the Air Force Reserve since 2002. He did deploy to Iraq in 2008. He left politics after losing a run for Senate in Georgia in 2020. Losing he ultimately won by Senator Raphael Warnock. Another pick for the Department of Interior, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. He was a largely unknown name before he ran for president in the Republican primary in the 2024 election cycle. He dropped out, endorsed Trump, and has campaigned with Trump on the trail. Now, Burgum has a background in business. He is personally wealthy from his life as a software executive. He is in his second term as governor of North Dakota, and that is the only elected position that he has ever had. It's the only campaigns he's ever run for governor of North Dakota. Now, all of these positions, VA, Interior, and HHS, would all be subject to Senate confirmation. They'll all be subject to hearings in their respective committees on the Senate side, of course, that will be led by Republicans next Congress, but Democrats, of course, on those committees as well will certainly have a chance to ask questions and ask probably hard questions of all of the nominees that the president-elect is putting forward.
National political correspondent Stephanie Lieberman, thank you. Matt Gaetz, Tulsi Gabbard, Pete Hegseth, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Those are just some of President-elect Trump's most provocative appointments, and it suggests he is valuing loyalty over expertise and experience. The question now, whether the new Republican majority in the Senate follows its constitutional duty to weigh each nominee's qualifications or simply acquiesces and lets Trump populate his new administration with whomever he wants. Scripps News contributor Kathleen Rice joining us now with all the rumblings of Congress right now. She's a former Democratic congresswoman from New York, a regular contributor for us here. Kathleen, thank you so much for coming on the show, as always. So when a president is announcing cabinet nominations, the Senate is clearly involved because of the advise and consent process. How does the House figure into this process, or is it simply a case of just sit back and watch?
The House really has nothing to do with this, although some of the people that Trump has chosen are coming from the House. They are active members of the House. Well, Matt Gaetz was until he resigned, but Elise Stefanik. So there are, but this is solely the responsibility of the Senate to advise and consent the president on these appointments. And so the House really has no vote. They're just going to sit back and watch, as you said. But, you know, you've already heard people in the Senate. First of all, most of the people who Donald Trump is announcing have been House members. Matt Gaetz, Tulsi Gabbard, as I said, Elise Stefanik. These are people that most of the people in the Senate know and have a working relationship with and will be able to ask, you know, probing questions of, if it even gets to that point, depending on who the nominee is.
So you mentioned Matt Gaetz. He resigned from his seat 2 days before that ethics committee was going to vote on whether to release their findings. They were expected to be pretty damning. This report about possible sexual misconduct and drug use. Now there's actually an effort to make that report public. Let's listen.
The timing of his resignation and flight with President-elect Donald Trump suggests he believes that this report is not friendly and favorable. So I want to read the report and find out what the investigation behind it brought out.
Now, you actually served with Gaetz in the House. So tell me what that was like, and how much influence will those findings have on the potential for him to be confirmed?
Well, I think there is the potential that if and when this report is released, that it will be completely disqualifying. I mean, I served with Matt Gaetz in the House. I had a specific one-on-one with him when this was back in 2017, 2018 time when the Republicans were subpoenaing people to testify before various committees on the Hill. And the night before one of these witnesses was meant to testify, Matt Gaetz made statements that really amounted to witness tampering. And as someone who holds himself out as a lawyer, he should have been well aware that the statements that he made were very threatening and were meant to intimidate this witness and maybe get them to not even show up because they were going to say negative things about Donald Trump. So I approached him on the House floor. I asked him to withdraw those statements. I reminded him that we are only temporary custodians of the Capitol and that we have to behave with a certain amount of integrity. He refused to do that, and so I filed a complaint with the Ethics Committee. He then tried to walk back his statements because I think his colleagues said, "You're going to be reprimanded," which he ultimately was. But he does not have the temperament. He doesn't have the experience. He's never done any major legal work whatsoever. And he came to Washington to be a flamethrower, to just lob bombs all over the place. He was behind removing Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. And regardless of what you thought about Kevin McCarthy as a Speaker, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, it threw the House into such a state of chaos that it couldn't work for a number of weeks, multiple weeks, until they could get someone who could get the votes. He is wholly unqualified for this. And I think that if I were in the Senate and I have worked with Matt Gaetz, I would say to myself, this is a guy who is only being nominated to do Trump's bidding, is going to be supremely loyal to Trump. And if I, as a senator, do or say anything that Trump doesn't like, he's going to sic Matt Gaetz, the Attorney General, on me. I mean, this literally would be catastrophic, to say nothing of just totally destroying an institution that matters to people. And, Trump
Right.
can talk about having
Kathleen,
a
I want
mandate,
to jump in really quick just
and he
because we're
doesn't-
short on time. Sorry to cut you off. I just want to squeeze in
Yeah.
one more question because we've got just about 30 seconds here. More broadly speaking, and you're touching on it right now, critics of Donald Trump will say the absurdity of the picks is the point. He wants to do a loyalty test of the Senate. Do you see it that way, whether it's Gates, Hegseth at the top of the Pentagon, whether it's Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, despite her ties to Russia, whether it's RFK as HHS Secretary? What do you think?
There's no question, because he learned from his first term when people were thrust upon him because he didn't know anything about the process. He's choosing now. And I actually think that Matt Gaetz is just like chum that he's throwing out in the water, that he doesn't really think that it's a serious nomination and that the Senate is going to maybe give him some other nominees that are less controversial and throw away people like Matt Gaetz.
Kathleen Rice, Scripps News contributor and former Congresswoman, thank you for everything you've done for the show over the years. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Rob?
Well, the U.S. says it will make no changes to its military support for Israel, despite growing calls by humanitarian groups that Israel is failing to do enough to get desperately needed supplies into Gaza. Last month, the U.S. had given Israel a 30-day deadline to surge aid into the territory, but that deadline passed this week. Meantime, multiple officials are confirming the result of Israel's attack on Iran last month. The strike targeted an active nuclear research facility that was shrouded in secrecy. Correspondent Giles Gibson has more now on the ground in Tel Aviv.
The nuclear research facility that was reportedly hit is 20 miles to the southeast of Tehran, and operations there had ceased back in 2003, but then Israeli and US intelligence agencies reportedly picked up activity at this site once again earlier this year. Now, according to these reports, in this strike, equipment that's used in the detonation process for a nuclear bomb was destroyed. Now, you'll remember that in the build-up to the October strikes by Israel and Iran, there was a lot of reporting that the Biden administration had been warning the Israeli government not to target any of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. But the theory is that because this site had not been publicly acknowledged by the Iranian government, they couldn't then, subsequently after the strikes, talk about this strike in public. Now, Iranian officials have insisted for some time now that they are not developing a nuclear weapon, but there is now some reporting that the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, is preparing to issue a censure resolution next week for the Iranians allegedly not cooperating with them. Meanwhile, the Israeli Defense Forces are saying that they are pushing their troops deeper into parts of southern Lebanon, villages that they have not been in since the start of the ground offensive, although that push is coming at a cost for Israeli forces. The IDF saying on Wednesday that 6 soldiers were killed, one of the worst days in terms of Israeli casualties since the start of this ground offensive. There are now reports that the two sides, Hezbollah and Israel, could be moving closer to some sort of a ceasefire deal. But in the meantime, Israeli airstrikes continue in southern Lebanon, in Beirut and other parts of the country, and also Hezbollah continue to fire rockets towards Israel in the opposite direction. Giles Gibson, Scripps News, Tel Aviv.
All right, still ahead for us. Senior meteorologist Scott Withers is here tracking a lot. The Northeast kind of in a weird spot.
Yeah, I mean, look at it. From Portland, Maine, all the way down to Atlantic City, New Jersey. We got threats of wildfires increasing. And crews, they're working around the clock trying to get that fire out near New Jersey and New York's border. You're watching Morning Rush. Whole bunch more coming up after this. Don't go anywhere. You will miss out.